What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Processing Blue, where, yes, we process blue for you. I'm Alex Zietlow, a reporter for the Charlotte Observer who covers the Carolina Panthers. And today I'm joined by Scott Fowler, our indelible columnist and resident Carolina Panthers historian. And Scott, you've been a little bit of everywhere these past few months, haven't you?
Yeah, I have not done a lot of Panthers stuff except from afar. I've watched with interest everything they've done, but I've been mainly on college basketball and the Charlotte Hornets, the resurgent Charlotte Hornets. So I've been following the dribbling ball here the last few months mostly.
Well, we're happy to have you today as our power hitter, Mike K, is on vacation this week, but we have a stacked and fun show for all of our listeners today. We'll talk a little NFL draft, and then later we'll be joined by Al Wallace, a key part of the Panthers' defense from 2002 to 2006, as well as someone who's on several different media ventures in the Charlotte area. Hope you'll enjoy that conversation as much as we did. It was really wonderful. But okay, first let's talk NFL draft this year. And well, not necessarily just limited to this year, but NFL draft in general. I want you to put on your historian cap for a second and disentangle my thoughts for a moment. So I love the NFL draft. You can talk about it endlessly. You can examine it endlessly. But one thing that's frustrating about it is we talk and talk and talk about it. And then sometimes all of this reading and all this preparing is all for naught because teams just utterly surprise you. And that sort of happened last year when the Panthers took Teteroa McMillan. Like he was a second consecutive wide receiver in the first round that the Panthers took. The Panthers had never done that before. Everyone was kind of looking at Jalen Walker, who is not only a North Carolina guy, but a really productive linebacker for Georgia. He could have fit the edge position for the Panthers or the inside linebacker position for the Panthers. And at least all of Carolina felt like, all of Charlotte felt like, was like, okay, Jalen Walker is going to be the guy. Then the Panthers took T-Mac. Everything worked out. He was Offensive Rookie of the Year, et cetera, et cetera. You know this story. This is why I wanted to get your perspective on this, because is there a most surprising move in Panthers draft night history that you can think of? Or was the T-Mac thing among them? I want your perspective on all that.
Yeah, well, T-Mac certainly in recent years that was one of the more surprising ones. But I would say there's been a couple. I'm going to give you a good one and a bad one, Alex, for balance sake, that I've seen all through the years. And so we'll start with a good one. In 2012, I was not 100% sure how to pronounce Luke Kuechly's name when he was drafted. He was listed as one of the potential players that the Panthers might pick, but they were fairly loaded at linebacker already by then. It did not seem like a place that they were going to go. And plus he was, although he had won a lot of major awards, he was from Boston College. And I think they'd gone something like 4-8. So he wasn't a guy that people necessarily thought, and he had the glasses, the Clark Kent look and all that stuff. But just not a guy that people necessarily thought would make it big in the NFL, would be the number 9 pick in the NFL. Well, we know how that worked out. So Luke Kuechly would be one of the positive ones that people weren't necessarily talking about a lot before it happened. Negative ones, I always say the worst draft pick in Panthers history was Ray Caruth for obvious reasons. I won't go into that sordid story today, but he was in 1997 a first-round pick that I know the team regrets they ever touched. But let's go a little bit 3 more years later, and maybe the most surprising pick, a guy I had really almost literally never heard of, was their first round pick that year. I think it was number 23, Rashad Anderson. Rashad Anderson was this big defensive back, kind of corner safety that George Seifert liked. He was the coach back in those days and kind of the de facto general manager as well. And he liked Rashad Anderson for whatever reason. I mean, we had to look up where he was from when he was chosen. He was from Jackson State. Only ended up playing 2 years for the Panthers. Really one of their biggest all-time busts. And the reason, unfortunately, was literally he kept getting busted for drugs. The NFL, it just was, sad. I mean, he just could not stay away from that, and so several times was suspended by the NFL due to various infractions of their, drug abuse policy, and now sadly is deceased. He died at age 45, died early. Not sure of the cause. But he only played here 2 years. And I just remember everyone in the media room looking around going, huh? Like, didn't know where Rashad Anderson was from. And that's not always a bad thing. Luke Kuechly and many others would show you that sometimes a surprise, T-Mac, a surprise is a great thing. But that was one of the really weird ones.
Is there something that could happen this year that would utterly surprise you? And I know that's a strange question, because if you can answer that, then it wouldn't surprise you ultimately. But like, I'm just finding that I'm talking a lot on radio shows. I'm writing a lot in the Charlotte Observer about a few positions, safety being one of them. I'm even writing about wide receiver. I'm writing about just like a few offensive tackle. These positions that the Panthers need immediately, and that there are a lot of options at number 19 in that first round. Is there something that the Panthers can do that you would just be like, and maybe not talk about specific players specifically in this question, but is there something the Panthers can do that you would just be like, yo, I was not expecting that at all?
Well, I would say if they chose a quarterback, I would be very shocked.
Right. Yeah, of course. Yeah, sure.
Hunter, field goal kicker, a lot of those sorts of positions. They're set there. But I wouldn't be shocked on the wide receiver thing. I know you wrote a good story about that recently. And I think they can go anywhere, Alex. That's the good part, right? Because they did well in free agency. They filled some of the most gaping holes. So I really think they can go anywhere. I'd like to see them pick somebody like Kenyon Sadiq at tight end. I feel like since Greg Olsen, they have never had that consistent threat. They've had some flashes from the Tommy Trimbles of the world, but never had a guy who's, going to be an 800-yard guy or something going down the seam all the time. I think that would be very helpful. Or maybe I tell you what, I'd never think you can have too many offensive linemen. I think that's I kind of think that's where they'll ultimately end up. But yeah, I think it's a good draft for them, in that they really can go anywhere. And it's so dependent when you're at 19 on all these other teams. You're not picking really high. They don't really know. They don't have a clue what's going to happen in those first 18 picks, no matter what they tell you. They might trade back. I don't think they'll trade up, but I think they might conceivably trade back too.
Yeah. Like that movie Draft Day, anything can happen. Vontae Mack, no matter whatever the case may be. No, that's really good stuff. We'll be talking about NFL draft stuff forever until the draft weekend, April 23rd through 25th. So I'll just keep finding different ways to ask you about it, Scott. But before we, let's this is the perfect time to move on to our interview with Al Wallace. We talked to him about a variety of things, including his journey to Carolina, what the Panthers will do this year, and even at the very end, some Charlotte 49ers football talk. Take a listen.
We're joined now by Al Wallace, one of my very favorite all-time Panthers. Al is in the local media now. He is part of the Charlotte 49ers broadcast team. He does a pregame show with the Panthers on Queen City News. He's on their postgame show as a contributor. But before all that, he was a defensive end for the Panthers from 2002 to 2006 and played on some of the best defensive lines in Panthers history. He was undrafted. We'll ask him about that today, and made his way into the NFL the hard way. Thought he was out of football and had taken a job as an assistant principal in Florida in 2002, but was lured back to the game by the Miami Dolphins, and then Carolina traded for him in the preseason. He played here 5 years. He had 17 sacks in those 5 years. Let me tell you, the Panthers would love to have somebody who's going to give them 17 sacks these days, and 4 interceptions as well. best years coincided with some of the Panthers' best seasons. 5 sacks in both 2003 and '05 when Carolina reached the Super Bowl and the NFC Championship game. Teammates with the Panthers included Julius Peppers, Chris Jenkins, Mike Rucker, Brenson Buckner, just some fearsome defensive lines he played on. Now lives in Charlotte, involved in a variety of family, businesses, and media pursuits. Al, welcome to the show.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate you very much. One, for that introduction, taking me back down memory lane a lot on some of those incredible experiences that I had here in with the Panthers in North Carolina. But just being able to hear that, it makes you kind of bubble up. You know, you don't hear those types of things every day, and then being able to join you guys is my pleasure. I appreciate you.
Well, thanks, Al. And you are current with the Panthers as well as one of their legends of the past. So let me start with let's go with right now. What's going on in the 2026 draft, which is very close later this month now. Panthers have pick number 19. What do you foresee them possibly doing there?
Yeah, Scott, I still think the Panthers are ultimately going to be focused on making that offense as good as possible, just sewing up some loose ends. And what I mean by that is a playmaker. I think this team still needs a playmaker. They have incredible skill position players, but do you have that home run hitter? And I think when you look at the draft, there are a couple of positions. Wide receiver, I still think is wide open. That playmaker at that position. T-Mac, incredible offensive player of the rookie of the year, just incredible job. Jalen Coker, look at Chuba Hubbard. But now I think you still need to address a dynamic tight end. A pass catching presence at the tight end position is something that the Panthers can still focus on. And being a big guy playing in the trenches, you can never have too many offensive linemen. So continue to build depth there. But instead of looking at a singular position, guys, what I'm really looking at is a dynamic playmaker on the offensive side. And Brooks is still there. You might have that guy already on the roster, but I think you can address that in the draft as well.
Al, is there anything that would just utterly surprise you that the Panthers could do at pick number 19? Because as you said, the offense is wide open. But is there anything that something happens at pick number 19 where you're just like, man, I did not expect that to happen?
Another defensive end, an edge rusher. And look, I played the position, and if you can have a rotation, then you're really good. You talk about Mike Rucker, Julius Peppers, then there's Shane Burton and myself and Kim Rasmussen, so many guys, Kendall Moorhead that came off of that bench. So you can always use guys that come off the bench and add depth to the pass rushing core of your defense. But it would shock me after the acquisition of Jalen Phillips, drafting two young guys a year ago. That would kind of be redundancy in my mind when there are other needs, other ways you can improve this roster. So the only thing I think that would shock me is an additional edge rusher, another young guy with two second-year players looking to improve this year for Dan Morgan and Dave Canales on that defense.
Al, you mentioned Jalen Phillips, and of course, everyone says the Panthers had a great free agency, which makes this draft sort of wide open for them. What was your favorite thing the Panthers have done in the offseason so far?
Yeah, I like Jalen Phillips because you need a veteran guy, and I always go back and refer to my time. I had been in the NFL for a while. You had guys like Brenson Buckner playing next to a second year emerging stud like Chris Jenkins, right? You had a veteran in Mike Rucker playing opposite of Julius Peppers. You need that balance on defense. So I really like not only that he's a playmaker, that he's very disruptive. The sack totals aren't there. And of course, everybody's going to, have some concerns about that along with the injury history. But a veteran guy that knows the game, that understands what to do, that can be a good role model for two guys that really impressed me, especially their growth. When you've seen those guys early in training camp to the development and the playmaking ability that you saw later on during the season. Drafting those two guys is really what the team needed. But I love Jalen Phillips because he is disruptive. He's going to cause chaos, and that's what you need. Someone that's going to live in the backfield, that's going to speed up the timing and the process of a quarterback and an offense, and that's the name of the game on the defensive side.
Al, a little bit of a leading question here, so forgive me in advance, but does this Panthers era, does this Panthers team remind you at all of the 2002, 2003, 2004 era of the Carolina Panthers? And what I mean by that exactly, I mean, is last year I got the chance to talk to Brenton Buckner actually, and I asked him, "Hey, does this 2002 draft feel at all like the drafting of Julius Peppers in 2002?" I'm not making the comparison between Teteroa McMillan and Julius Peppers quite yet, but the team was ascending at the end of 2024. Bryce Young looked really good. They then got a weapon that ultimately and was supposedly going to elevate his game, which Teteroa McMillan obviously did. And it was kind of the same thing in 2002. That defensive line was already really good, and they just added to it with Julius Peppers. The teams do have similar characteristics in some other ways. Al, am I being a little too optimistic by drawing the comparisons between these two eras of Panthers football?
Yeah, I don't think so, because when I look at it, and I'll even go to what the Hornets are doing now, the one ingredient we had that no one in the NFL accounted for in 2003, we didn't know we weren't supposed to beat everybody. We didn't know we weren't supposed to be the cardiac cats and watch John Casey kick the ball through the uprights. So when you play with that type of maybe ignorance, if I can use that word, you just do your job. You trust the coaches. And what I saw from this 2025 iteration of the Panthers was a team that finally started to trust what Dave Canales and Dan Morgan were planning. I think a lot of us, if we're honest, there's some doubt. Like, what are we doing? Like, what is Dan Morgan doing? What is Dave Canales doing as a play caller, as a head coach? And then you start to see it click and come together. And it is just that one missing ingredients. It could be just a T-Mac. And then it was, a guy like Rico Dowdle coming in and providing that spark. We had Stephen Davis. Remember, we didn't have that guy in 2002, but that last 6-game stretch, winning the last 3 out of 4 in 2002, propelled us to an incredible offseason where we bonded, where we learned how to love each other. We trusted the guys next to us, and we trusted John Fox and the plan that he was trying to teach us. And that was, we're going to play tough. It was not going to be pretty. That is not who we were going to be. But we're going to win football games. We're going to drag people to the deep end. And when they could no longer breathe, we're going to put them under the water. And that's what we did for 17 weeks, 16 games in 2003, and found ourselves in Houston in the Super Bowl. So I think you're right, Alex. Very similar. And there are one or two pieces away. Now, we don't know if those pieces are Jalen Phillips bringing in some offensive linemen to solidify the depth at that position, but it could be in the draft. It could be another young piece. But the confidence of Bryce Young, I think the experience now of Dave Canales and that team coming together, the love, the bond, the belief in one another is very reminiscent of those teams I played in on 02 and 03.
Al, I have always, I've covered all the Panthers teams, hence this gray hair. And I've always told people that Chris Jenkins, to me, is one of the most underrated players the Panthers have ever had, because for 3 years or so in there, his prime, he was basically Derek Brown, maybe better. I wondered if you could tell a little bit about Chris Jenkins, and then also, and Pep as well, because I always love to hear a good Julius Peppers story. I mean, was Chris Jenkins sometimes a better player than Julius Peppers, or am I just remembering that wrong?
I think Chris Jenkins was, at the time those two guys were on the field together, he was the more dominant player. He was just simply more dominant at his position as an interior defensive lineman than a 20-year-old and a 21-year-old Julius Peppers, who was still learning what it meant to be a pro. He was trying to absorb things from, myself and Buckner and Mike Rucker. He's trying to learn the position. What he was the most talented athlete maybe in the NFL at that time, size, weight, athletic ability. But Chris Jenkins was just a hard pill to swallow for every offensive lineman. I tell the story all the time. John Fox, that side of the ball, they literally had to tell him, allow us to practice, like, let us run this play. Don't blow it up, because when he wanted to, he could not be blocked. Jeff Mitchell, Kevin Donnelly, Stussy, and those guys, they understood when Chris Jenkins wanted to, he could just wreck the entire practice. And he took that to Sundays. This was a guy 6'5". I'll be nice here, guys. 350 pounds. I just being fair.
That is nice, yeah.
But this guy was incredible. That size, that speed. But we've never got tired. He was as quick and as agile as anybody on the field, like guys like Steve Smith. He was as athletic and nimble as anyone at that size. So yeah, it was a changing of the guard, and that heated rivalry with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers came because Brenson Buckner literally told Warren Sapp, it's over. Here's the new guy. This is the new face of interior defensive lineman. He did it his way. He was always a jokester. He lived life 1,000 miles an hour, and he played that way too. You're talking about an incredible force. You are not wrong. He's probably the most dominant guy we had on that defense. Julius Peppers, the best athlete, of course, with the gold jacket now.
Yeah. Man, those are great stories. I wanted to ask about your great story specifically, but even before you got to Carolina, Scott mentioned in his introduction of you that you were an assistant principal at one point. You were also a wide receiver in high school. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Like, is there a way to concisely sum up your story leading up to the Panthers, or is that just not possible?
I mean, I'd likely have to write a book at some point, Alex, to be honest with you. But it was just a journey, and I think you want to, of course, talk about these things with some humility. But it was just a guy who refused to take no, a guy that wanted to realize the dream of playing in the NFL, and everything I did. Just went with that. I was a receiver in high school, started off at running back, continued to grow. Landed in Maryland in August of 1992, and I was a 6'2", 185-pound guy, wore number 86. And quickly, once I saw the level of athletes and the talent at that position, I knew I was going to have to do something else. Didn't know if that was going to be tight end, but just had one day in practice where we just, offensive guys, swapped sides of the ball just for fun. And I was an outside linebacker. They put me there. I pass rush. They saw something. So when the upperclassmen came in a day later, hey, can you do this again, Al? The thing you did yesterday when we were just, messing around. And I did. And they brought better and better offensive linemen in the fold. And I blew past them. And I used my speed, slammed on the brakes, underneath move, spin move. Of course, I'm still only about 200 pounds at this time. I go in the locker room. I'm not in the wide receiver section anymore. I'm now in the outside linebacker section. I go from 86 to 56, told I was redshirted 3 days after arriving. Remember, there's no transfer portal. There's none of that stuff. So I have to stick it out. I live in the weight room. I go home for Christmas break, and I had grown 3 inches. I'm now 6'5" and about 245 pounds. And I would go to the weight room every opportunity on my way to classes every day, get a workout in, and do the required things. I just was always driven, and that transferred into my journey in the NFL. Undrafted, Tom Coughlin, Jacksonville Jaguars. I learned how to work. There's one thing you were going to do with Tom Coughlin is work your tail off, and I did that. It wasn't always an easy journey. Got injured along the way in Chicago and some other stops, broken ankle with Andy Reid, and found myself back at home working in West Palm Beach, Florida, at Palm Beach Lakes High School as an assistant principal. Thought my dream was over. Got a futures deal with the Dolphins, traded a week before training camp, landed in Spartanburg, North Carolina, 15-hour drive. And what a dream, what a ride. And it just takes me to a plane ride home after a Super Bowl loss. Marty Herney, John Fox, we want you to be a Panther. Could have gone somewhere else, but my loyalty, the opportunity they gave me is why I'm sitting here still in Charlotte. Just an incredible, incredible journey. If I could sum that up right there in about 3 minutes.
No,
That's good.
That was so wonderful. And also, it's just crazy to me to think that just a fun drill at practice ultimately enabled your entire career. I'm sure that, like, over the years, the story has been polished and, like, obviously, but, like, that's probably the moment that everything changed. It's crazy to think about.
Yeah, life certainly changed. I remember immediately going back to the dorm, to the phone in my, getting out the calling card back in the day and calling my dad and like, you guys got to come get me. Remember, I'm from South Florida. Hey, you got to come get me. I don't belong here. They're putting me at defensive end. I'm 200 pounds. I'm getting destroyed. But that was motivation to get in the weight room. And I just celebrated last week my 52nd birthday, and I'm still in the weight room. I'm still trying to stay in shape, but it was built in all those days, man, of just getting knocked around and beat up. And I didn't quit, and I competed, and I found myself obviously in the perfect position in the life and the career that I've had that came through Charlotte right here with the Panthers.
Al, last thing from me, but I just wondered, as you mentioned briefly there, you were undrafted. Obviously, that was a mistake. You ended up having a long career in the NFL. Happens to a lot of guys. Jake Delhomme was undrafted, many other players undrafted who had big-time careers. But when draft day rolls around every year, what's your feelings about it? Do you have mixed blessings about it? Or you still sort of hold a grudge like, well, they didn't draft me, and look how that turned out. So obviously people miss all the time. Or, I mean, what's kind of your personal feeling about drafts?
I think the draft is incredible. No invite to the combine. I aced my pro day, but I'm gonna just go kind of against you a little bit. I think I was appropriately drafted or not, because what I was considered at that time in 1997, the word was a tweener. Now they're called edge, right? Edge can be 235 all the way to 270. But at 255, when I came out of Maryland, I had a 37-inch vertical. I ran the 240s at 455 and 457. Broad jump 10-7, like 28, 30 times on the bench press. Those numbers would have garnered me a first round draft score, I think, in today's game. But in 1997, it was not the wide open passing game it is today. So I was considered a tweener, probably too big to play linebacker and no experience dropping off from coverage, but too small to be the 280, 290 pound defensive ends that currently existed in that era's game. Heavy run game. You think about the Cowboys of that era. And so I think I was appropriately not drafted, but what it did is it gave me an opportunity to shine a light on what my strengths were. And that was just outworking the room. I was never as talented, obviously, as Julius Peppers, and I was never as technically sound and proficient as Mike Rucker. What I was smack dab in the middle. But the thing I brought to the table, and it's not saying they didn't have it, there was not a person on any 53-man roster that I had been on that was willing to go to the places I was as far as working, giving you everything I had. I was very versatile at defensive end to run down and play special teams. That kept me around on NFL rosters for 10 seasons because of my ability to do so many things and to just outwork the room. And I try to tell that to my kids, the kids I coach, people that I'm around, speaking engagements. That was my superpower. It still is in everything I do. I'm just going to outwork the room. So appropriately undrafted, tough road. I wouldn't change it for the world. It built a lot of character in me, and hopefully a model for others who are going to be in this position coming up. The draft is unbelievable, but it's not the end of, or it's not the beginning of it's not the end of the story. It's the beginning is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. That was great. This has been really awesome, Al. I'm going to have one final question, and we're going to talk about Charlotte 49ers football, if you will oblige us for just a quick second. Head coach Tim Albin's going into his second year there. What are your initial impressions of the 49ers this year, and what should the people of Charlotte expect from this team?
Yeah, I think high expectations, right? And of course, you never want to sound like you're disparaging anyone else that came before Tim Albin. But the difference is, from a football lifer from 9 years old, I still work in football now. This is a football guy. Will Healy was an incredible college football coach, and he brought the energy. He brought so much attention to that program. But what was missing was the execution of the football portion. So now you go to the next iteration, which was Biff Poggi, right? And you get a guy who's a CEO. I'm going to hire all these incredible minds. I'm going to be able to go and bring all these kids here through the transfer portal, but it was never a team. There's no cohesiveness in that program. And now what you've seen, even in literally the worst football season since I've been part of the Charlotte 49ers, was a guy that came in. He understands football. The coaches shows that we did every week with myself and Matt Swear, he knows football. We talk football on the show because that's who he is. That's how he started. That's what he's been doing for 3 decades or so of his life. So what I think, Tim gives this football team is an opportunity to go out there and execute, is to scheme up guys, is to have really good game plans. And you can see that now what you have to do in his second year is get the talent, get the pieces. And there are so many factors that go into that, Alex, as far as, the collectives and the money that the team is in, the program, the school, university is going to have to put together to be able to give him what he needs to field a good product. But I think they had good fundamentals. They had great talent. It was spread throughout the roster. But if you can kind of condense that and get it to come together in year 2, I think we're going to see a program that's going to turn around quickly. 7 years ago, I walked onto that campus and I lived maybe 10 minutes away. I had no idea of the resources, the facilities, everything that has been built there in Charlotte. And I was completely blown away by what it looks like to be there on campus. And if you can get kids to buy in and to believe in the program, with what I believe is the best coaching staff that this football program has had, you're going to start to win. You're going to see this thing turn around. And I'm excited to see what Tim Albin can do here in year 2.
Well, Al, this has been terrific. Thank you for giving us a Charlotte 49ers preview as well. I saw Wes Miller, their new basketball coach, the other day, and he said he's tired of hearing of the Charlotte 49ers as a sleeping giant. He says this Giants got to be waking up at this point.
So
hopefully so. But we thank you for all your Panthers stories and all your just your journey and also your thoughts on what they're going to do this year. So thanks very much, Al Wallace, for being on Processing Blue.
I appreciate it. I appreciate the guys you do. And a huge part of why I do this now is my time specifically in that Panthers locker room and having the connections and the relationships with you, Scott, and everybody else that covers the team, and just being so gracious and understand the job that you all have to do, and kind of being on the other side, just how difficult that could be, challenging that could be at times. So just wanted to say I appreciate everything you do. And obviously I'm in this game because of people like you all that just cover the game in the right way.
Thank you.
All right. And we're back. Well, that was just great. I really enjoyed Al's willingness to really share his story. I was not expecting him to be so to be able to explain such a long and great story in 3 minutes and so concisely. It was really impressive. Scott, what was your favorite part of the interview?
Well, Al has always been to me one of the real underrated Panthers. I mean, he was a career backup here, but that really undersells what he did. I mean, he had a couple of 5-sack years. He was a really good player on some very good teams. But I guess I enjoy, the fact that he was an assistant principal in Florida and somehow resurrected his career at the, kind of at the last shot sort of thing. Also, I like the fact he was a wide receiver in high school, because who would want to have tackled Al Wallace in high school? I mean, the guy's 6'5", probably 285. That was probably what he played at here. And yet that guy was fast enough to be this is a guy who could post some 4.5s in the 40. I mean, he was a freakish athlete, and probably wasn't, on many teams by the time he was in his prime could have started, but they had Peppers and Rucker here. But man, he was a really fun player and really does a lot of great stuff for the community too. So big fan of Al Wallace and appreciate him coming on the show.
Yeah. And I love what you asked him about how he felt about draft night. Because we make it such a big deal in NFL media across the country and all these things about NFL draft night, but so many important players go undrafted. So yep, that was really great. Okay, Scott, if you can entertain me for one more segment and we'll get you out of here, that would be great. I was thinking that we could grade Dan Morgan's first 2 drafts as the general manager of the Carolina Panthers. Obviously, he took over the general manager spot in 2024. He is about to enter his 3rd NFL draft, and and I was just looking at these picks, and I was just like, man, like these are 2 pretty consequential drafts for the Panthers, and I think for beyond just 2026 as well. So I was hoping that we could grade them. I am going to list all the draft picks, and then we're going to give our grades at the end. Does that sound cool?
Sure.
Okay. In 2024, the Panthers selected Xavier Legette. They went up and got him in the first round. They didn't initially have a first-round pick. They went up and got Xavier Legette in the first round to secure that 5th-year option. Then they went and got Jonathan Brooks, Trevin Wallace, Jatavian Sanders, Shaw Smith-Wade, Jaden Crumedy, and Michael Barrett in the 7th round, though Dan Morgan then traded Michael Barrett for Mike Jackson, who is now an important part of the Panthers' secondary. Also on that first draft in 2024, he added a 2025 2nd-round pick from the drafts that draft night. So it was a really consequential night for the Panthers in 2024. And then in 2025, you guys all remember it, Tedero McMillan in the 1st round, Nick Scorton in the 2nd. Then it was Princely Umanmielen, Trevor Etienne, Lathan Ransom, Cam Jackson, Mitchell Evans, and then Jimmy Horn. Scott, when you put all this in front of you, what grade would you give Dan Morgan?
Well, I'll give him 2, one for 2024 and one for 2025. For 2025, I think that was exceptional. I mean, that's pretty obvious with T-Mac's year, but also, I mean, you got to hit on some mid and low round people for a draft to be really good. I think Mitchell Evans is pretty good. Jimmy Horn, has flashed a little bit. Princely and Scorton, I think, will be contributors this year. A lot of players really contributing on that team, and you've got one guy who's the headliner in T-Mac. So I give that one an A-. Not perfect, not the best draft ever, which would have been when they got, Dan Morgan, Steve Smith, and Chris Jenkins in the same year, 3 Pro Bowlers in 2001. That's an A+. This I would give an A-. 2024, Alex, I'm not too fond of that one, really. I would probably give that a C right now, given Legette's sort of on and off performance so far. I think Trevin Wallace has been a good player for them. Jonathan Brooks, has barely been on the field. I'm sorry for him. I'm sorry he's been hurt, but they really need, for a 2nd-round pick, you really need to get something out of that. And unfortunately, circumstances have not allowed that to happen. So I guess that's what I go. C on 2024 and A- on 2025. How about yourself?
Are you gonna average out the 2 grades for a letter grade?
Oh yeah, I guess I would average to a B+, probably.
Okay.
Maybe just a straight B, actually.
Okay, a B+. Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go A- for when you compare both of them, or when you combine both of them. I thought 2025 was largely a home run. Nick Scorton is probably going to start next year. Princely he still has some coming up to do, but they really like Trevor Etienne. They really like Lathan Ransom and how he can kind of be the future of that safety group. 2025 was really good. And then in 2024, yes, I understand the Jonathan Brooks of it all. I am still really high on him. I think that he can have a really impactful year in 2026. So I'm not out on that pick just yet. I think the Mike Jackson acquisition, I'm lumping that in all the 2024 draft night stuff. And that has just changed this defense entirely. It's kind of hard to imagine what this defense would look like without cornerback Mike Jackson. And then like you just gotta take into account that they just didn't have a lot of draft capital in 2024. Dan Morgan had to make a lot of things happen because the previous regime, the previous front office exhausted a lot of draft capital stuff to get Bryce Young and to do a whole bunch of other things. So overall, I am giving Dan Morgan an A-, which is a slightly higher grade than what you gave him. But I think that Dan would think both of our grades are pretty fair. Scott, anything that I need to hit on before we get on out of here?
No, I don't think so. It's been fun.
Awesome. Well, with that, thanks as always for listening to our pontifications on all things Panthers with Scott Fowler and myself and our wonderful producer, Zach Dennis. Please subscribe and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts by searching Processing Blue. And if you watch us on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on the bell icon to get notified whenever new episodes drop. And finally, please be sure to stick to charlotteobserver.com for all of your Panthers needs. Scott, stay humble, stay creative, and keep processing.